You have 10 minutes to start tearing it down, or we'll have it removed ourselves.
That's what Thora Bellamy, president of the Gravemont Vale HOA board, said as she stood 3 inches from my basalt fence, arms folded like she owned the ridge it sat on. Behind her, 2 private contractors loitered near a wheelbarrow full of demolition tools. They didn't look uncertain. They'd clearly done this before. Thora's blazer sleeves were still pinned with the HOA's silver badge patch, an embroidery she had made herself when the committee voted down her request for uniforms. Her mouth curled when she said illegal structure, like she'd rehearsed it. I didn't flinch. I just reached into the survey tube slung over my shoulder, unrolled the county-verified parcel overlay, and held it up to the morning sun. "You're standing on my land," I said, "and that includes the fiber access trench under your clubhouse." The contractors stopped moving. Now's the right time to subscribe, because this isn't just about a fence. It's about a neighborhood where every title error, every power trip, and every HOA lie can be proven. I've got the map. My name is Merrick Soltran. I'm a land entitlement strategist. I consult for developers and title insurers when boundary disputes get messy, and Gravemont Vale is messier than most. This ridge, it's Parcel 1, the original tract. My grandfather carved it from volcanic rock by hand in 1967. That fence behind me, it's not ornamental, it's a deeded boundary, and when my mother passed, that boundary became mine, along with the utility access running beneath the HOA's common area, which they never lawfully acquired. Thora didn't know that. Not yet. But she knew enough to hate me for not folding. She smirked when I refused to remove the stones. "You can take it up with the county after we file the lien. I've seen how that line works on other homeowners. I've watched good people break under the weight of daily fines and mail threats. But I've also seen what happens when someone like her files against a property she doesn't own. She doesn't get a victory, she gets a voided charter. And I wasn't just doing this for me. My daughter, Lena, was 6 when the accident happened, blindsided at a crosswalk, vertebrae shattered. Physical therapy started slow, but she made progress every time she worked the garden along the inner edge of that basalt wall. That space, shielded, elevated, hers, became the only place she didn't need to wear a brace. When she told me she wanted to plant strawberries along the north edge this spring, I said yes. 2 weeks later, Thora filed her first violation notice. Non-conforming structure. Not dangerous, not damaged, not obstructive. Just different. Just something she didn't approve of. But the part that made my hands tremble wasn't the fine. It was what Lena asked me when she saw the paper. "Daddy, did I do something wrong?" That's why I was standing here now, between my daughter's healing, and a woman who thought paperwork gave her power. That's why I'd printed the parcel overlay, not just to defend the fence, but to make it clear. This land remembers its lines. The HOA never had jurisdiction over Parcel 1. Their original incorporation failed to secure the plat merger because my mother never signed it. And when she passed, that flaw didn't vanish. It became a legal sinkhole under their entire governance structure. They didn't just overstep. They stepped off the map. Now Thora wanted to tear down my family's legacy with 2 hired goons and a clipboard. But I wasn't going to stop her with emotion. I was going to stop her with land law. And the moment she stepped 1 inch further past the edge of that deeded line, she was trespassing. Thora didn't step back. If anything, she leaned in. She gave the contractors a silent nod, and one of them adjusted his gloves like it was just another Tuesday. He picked up a pry bar, but his eyes flicked to the survey overlay still fluttering in my hand. I saw it in his hesitation. The crack of doubt. The second man shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the far end of the ridge where the HOA clubhouse sat above a cluster of buried telecom conduit markers. Bright orange plastic caps, half buried in gravel. Utilities no one ever thinks about until something goes wrong. The first man reached the fence. "Touch it," I said, "and I'll file trespass and property damage. You're operating on a parcel not covered by HOA authority." Thora's voice snapped across the stone like a whip. "This entire subdivision is under architectural committee jurisdiction. That includes setbacks, fencing, and all visual impact zones. You're obstructing a common sightline." I turned the overlay just enough for the sun to cut through it. The outline of Parcel 1 glowed like a wound across her argument. This parcel was never absorbed into the HOA's Phase 1 development. My family never signed the plat merger. The county has no record of any such consolidation. She blinked just once. It was fast, but it told me everything. She didn't know. She'd assumed, like most HOAs do, that everything within the walls belonged to her maps, her charter, her rules. But assumptions aren't standing, and nothing in the Gravemont Vale Articles of Incorporation overrode deeded land ownership with an unmerged plat. "You're bluffing," she said, but her tone had cooled. "No, you just never checked the county register." A door opened on the clubhouse terrace behind her. A couple stepped out, residents of Parcel 4B. The woman was holding a leash, the man a coffee. They froze halfway down the steps, eyes darting from Thora to me to the pry bar still hanging from the contractor's hand. "You do this a lot?" I asked. "Call in contractors for unsanctioned removal without judicial process? That's not standard enforcement procedure. It's retaliation." She didn't answer, but I knew what was behind her silence, because I'd read the bylaws myself. 3 months ago, Thora had quietly pushed a revision through the board. Any structure not consistent with Gravemont visual standards could be reclassified as a nuisance without a homeowner hearing. It passed in a 3-2 vote, with both dissenters resigning the following week. Thora was on a campaign. A month earlier, she'd forced a retired firefighter on Parcel 9 to remove a wrought iron eagle from his porch. 2 weeks after that, a single mother on Parcel 5B had her patio shade structure condemned for excessive color contrast. I'd watched her parade through the neighborhood with a laminated copy of the design manual like it was a sheriff's badge. This wasn't about fences. It was about erasing everything that didn't match her vision of Gravemont Vale. My fence, my family's land, was just the next casualty. I lowered the overlay and stepped between the contractors and the stones. "This is your final notice," I said. "Enter this property again, and you'll trigger civil penalties and a title dispute hearing." Thora's eyes narrowed. She studied my face like she was trying to recalibrate. Then she turned on her heel and walked away. The contractors didn't follow her. One of them gave me a short nod before slowly unloading the wheelbarrow. Tools back in the bed of the truck. No one spoke. Across the street, more neighbors had emerged. A couple of them whispered behind their hands. One had her phone out. Whether it was to record or call someone, I couldn't tell. I waited until Thora reached the sidewalk, her heels tapping like punctuation. "You're making this harder than it has to be," she called back without looking. I didn't answer. She would escalate. I knew that. She wouldn't stop until she broke something. Or someone. But I wasn't the one on unstable ground. She was. And the deeper she dug, the closer she came to finding out just how many of Gravemont's foundations were built on land that didn't legally belong to her board at all. Elias Kern was already waiting when I arrived at the HOA office the next morning. He stood just inside the doorway with a manila folder clutched tight to his chest, like it might catch fire if anyone else touched it. His tie was crooked, his glasses fogged slightly from the steam rising off his travel mug. If Thora was all polish and pageantry, Elias looked like the inside of an old filing cabinet. Quiet, overlooked, but built from records no one ever bothered to read. "You got a second?" he asked, voice low. I nodded and stepped inside. The HOA office wasn't much more than a converted model home. White walls, boxed files along the floor. A large framed aerial photo of Gravemont Vale hanging above the main desk. I'd studied that photo more times than I could count. It was taken before the fiber grid installation, before the lot splits were finalized. Back when Parcel 1 was still, labeled as Pending Access Agreement. I walked toward the back table and set down my field bag. Elias followed, looking nervously over his shoulder before closing the door behind him. "I can't say anything officially," he started, "but I looked up the overlay you mentioned yesterday. You weren't wrong." His hand shook as he placed the folder on the table. Inside were 2 plat maps, one stamped by the county from 1982 and one from 2007 marked GVP Hayes 1. The earlier map showed Parcel 1 as unincorporated. The newer one showed it absorbed into the HOA development. But the signature box for Parcel 1, blank. "Your mother never signed the access grant," Elias muttered, "and without that, Gravemont's Phase 1 boundaries aren't legally continuous. Not over your lot anyway." I leaned in, staring at the missing signature like it had just cracked open the whole house of cards. "Thora's been using that newer map as her legal justification," he continued. She presents it at every violation hearing, says the overlays were finalized at the county level, but I checked the filings. That version was submitted, not recorded. There's no clerk number, no absorption letter. I looked up at him. How long have you known? He hesitated. I started noticing discrepancies when she forced the utility easement reclassification last month. Said we needed to reroute fiber maintenance costs through Parcel 3A, but I remembered that conduit wasn't supposed to exist on HOA land, and it doesn't. It runs through yours. I said nothing. Let the silence settle between us. She's rewriting boundaries by assumption, Elias said finally. No vote, no verification. And if you go public with this, she'll call it harassment, I finished for him. He gave a sad smile. Or weaponized policy. Again. I closed the folder. The pieces were aligning. Thora wasn't just overreaching. She was using administrative smokescreens, strategic map swaps, selective enforcement, and hope that no one would challenge the paperwork. Elias rubbed his eyes. I shouldn't be showing you this. But you did, I said. Why? He looked toward the door. Because I was there when they poured the conduit slab over your father's trench. The HOA didn't notify your family. Just assumed silence meant surrender. He paused. And because if she does this to you, she'll do it to someone else, someone without your background. I nodded, slowly. The map in my hands wasn't just evidence, it was leverage, proof that the foundation of Gravemont Vale rested on legal sand. I stood up. I won't use your name. You don't have to, Elias said, already heading toward the door. But if this goes where I think it will, you'll need more than paper. You'll need pressure. He didn't wait for a reply. He stepped out into the hall and disappeared behind the main desk, just another HOA official, going about his day. But now I had what Thora feared most, verification that her authority didn't exist. Not over my land, not over my fence, and not over the easement that kept her board connected to every resident's internet access. The only thing left was how far she'd go before she realized it. It started with the warning letter, certified envelope, red ink across the top. Final notice before enforcement. Inside, the same phrases Thora had used before, only louder this time. Non-compliant visual obstruction, 30-day cure period bypassed, board authorized removal pending. And at the bottom, typed in bold with no signature, HOA authorized contractor may proceed with removal under emergency powers provision. Emergency powers, over a fence. I didn't miss the implication. Thora was done playing policy games. She was accelerating, skipping hearings, bypassing votes. Framing this as a public safety issue meant she could act unilaterally under a clause buried halfway through the HOA charter, meant for a flood damage or gas leaks, and she thought I wouldn't know that. I set the letter on the kitchen table beside Lena's breakfast plate and stared out the window. The morning light touched the edge of the basalt fence, the sun pulling long shadows from each stone. The strawberries were coming in, tiny green nubs poking through the dirt. She'd been so proud of planting them. Now it was all marked for demolition. I heard the front door open. My neighbor, Greta Wild, stepped into the yard with her giant orange tabby slung over one shoulder. She didn't knock. She just waved the letter she'd received too. They cited my garage light, she said. Said it reflects off your stone wall and causes a glare. I blinked. You serious? She nodded. Said they're enforcing it under community lighting harmony standards. Merrick, what's happening? She knew. They all did. Something had shifted. I walked with her to the end of the sidewalk, where the ridge dipped slightly between our properties. A new wooden stake had been hammered into the gravel, bright pink ribbon fluttering from the top. Surveyor's marker? Greta asked. No, I said. This is psychological warfare. Thora wanted to be seen claiming the line. She wanted neighbors to wonder what she was preparing for. To make my fence look temporary, even to people who didn't understand property law. 3 houses down, a delivery truck rolled past, pausing at the HOA clubhouse. A man in a neon vest dropped off 2 plastic totes and glanced up at the ridge. His gaze lingered, long enough to make me sure of what I already suspected. She was staging it, not just removal, a spectacle. Thora wanted this to be a public takedown. I walked back inside and opened my laptop, logged into the parcel viewer through the county's GIS interface, pulled up Parcel 1, Overlaid utility maps. Confirmed. The buried conduit line passed not just under my ridge, but under the slab beneath the HOA security outpost, complete with a timestamp from the telecom company's most recent maintenance dig. That outpost was powered, monitored, and cooled through my access corridor, and still they threatened demolition. I took screenshots, backed up the layers, opened a second browser tab, and submitted a formal inquiry to the county infrastructure registrar, requesting documentation of all easement work permits in Gravemont Vale filed after 2006. If they couldn't produce permits tied to my parcel, then any HOA-built structure over that conduit would be unpermitted and, more importantly, illegally situated. And that meant liability, insurance claims, property devaluation, risk exposure, none of which would sit well with the residents who thought they were buying into a worry-free community. I'd warned her once, about the land, about the law, about my background. She chose escalation anyway. But now I had more than a missing signature, more than a plat map. I had a utility corridor wrapped around the heart of Gravemont's digital infrastructure, and Thora had planted a flag on top of it without knowing where the fault line ran. The only question was how long it would take before the rest of the board realized what she'd dragged them into, and whether they'd still be standing when the ground gave out. The confirmation came 3 days later, buried in a bland email with a .pdf attachment titled Easement Work Index, Gravemont Subdivision. The document was only 6 pages long, but it said everything. Not a single permit had ever been filed for the slab construction beneath the HOA security outpost. No work orders, no access agreements, no excavation tags. Just an empty section where my parcel ID, GV01, should have appeared had they followed process. They didn't. Thora had authorized construction over a fiber trunk line that ran through my family's land, without asking, without registering, and without legal right. That concrete pad, that building, they were illegal structures sitting atop a telecom corridor the HOA didn't own. She hadn't just overstepped boundaries, she'd built on them. I forwarded the document to my encrypted archive, added it to the parcel evidence folder, and backed it up twice. Then I printed a hard copy and slid it into the red binder I kept near the kitchen firebox, labeled in my own handwriting, Gravemont Defense. But that wasn't the discovery that shifted the board. It was what I saw that night on the HOA community site, buried under the upcoming agenda tab, a vote, emergency fund allocation, structure reclamation operations. Phase 1, Parcel 1, fence clearance phase. 2, Parcel 1, slab reinforcement. She wasn't just planning to destroy the fence. She wanted to pour concrete over the ridge, permanently burying the original boundary markers. Cementing HOA ownership with a physical statement. One, that, if left unchallenged, could be photographed, printed, and waved around like proof. It was the most dangerous kind of overreach, the kind that could pass for legitimacy just by being built fast. I stood at the window and watched as Lena knelt by the inner edge of the basalt wall, gently watering the roots of the early strawberry sprouts. Her physical therapist said, crouching like that helped rebuild hip stability. And she'd been smiling again lately, not much, but enough that I saw color return to her cheeks. She didn't know about the agenda item, didn't know that in 72 hours, her sanctuary might be torn apart under the justification of safety improvements. I closed the laptop. My hands were steady. My thoughts were not. I'd worked enough boundary cases to know the timeline. Thora would fast-track the vote, document it through an internal resolution, then hire an emergency contractor to begin overnight prep work. I'd seen it before. Gravel dumped on driveways, concrete mixers showing up unannounced, utility flags stabbing the grass like warning signs no one could read. But this time, she was gambling with something bigger than a hedge line or a mailbox. She was gambling with the HOA's legal standing, and I was ready to tip the table. I grabbed the binder and drove out to the east boundary of Gravemont Vale, the part no one visited anymore, past the clubhouse, past the forgotten parcel lines, down the slope to the gravel lot where the fiber maintenance hub was installed 10 years ago. A low hum buzzed from the concrete slab, faint but constant. I could hear it through my boots. The outpost pulsed with power drawn from underground lines, my lines, built during a cooperative telecom deal before the HOA even existed. The corridor permit was still in my family name. I reached for my phone and called the registrar. County Infrastructure, this is Alden. This is Merrick Soltrin. I'm calling to report unauthorized structural use of private easement property, parcel GV001. There was a pause. Understood, Mr. Soltrin. Can you confirm there's no recorded use agreement on file? There is not, and I have written confirmation from your office to prove it. Another pause. Then, we'll escalate this to legal review. If confirmed, you'll have the right to file for removal, injunction, or usage fees. Copy me on every step. I hung up, and just like that, the map wasn't just theory, it was evidence. The corridor was no longer invisible. The absence of permits became a presence in the room, something weight-bearing, something that could crush a charter. I walked back to my truck with the hum still echoing behind me. Thora had built her power on silence and assumption. But I had the line, and now it was lit. The demolition crew arrived just after dawn. No notice, no board vote results posted, no courtesy warning. Just the low rumble of diesel engines crawling up the main ridge path and the metallic thud of a trailer gate slamming open across the crushed gravel. From my front steps, I counted 4 men, 2 hauling tools, 1 marking measurements with a spray wand, and a 4th directing the operation while speaking into a handheld radio. None of them wore HOA insignia, but the clipboard in the lead man's hand had the Gravemont seal printed at the top. I stepped outside before they crossed the property line. You're trespassing. The foreman looked up, barely pausing. We were told this structure was marked for immediate removal. Who told you that? Work order came from the Gravemont Vale HOA board, signed yesterday. I held up my phone. You might want to stop moving, because this parcel was excluded from their authority at incorporation. And you're currently staging equipment on a private lot that includes an unrecorded utility corridor. That made him pause. He lowered the radio slowly. You Merrick? I am. One of the crew muttered something under his breath, and the foreman turned, hissed back at him, then turned to me again. We're just here to work, man. You want to take it up with the board. Be my guest. You're not touching that fence. I don't want to touch anything, he said. But if we leave without starting, they won't pay us. I took a step closer. Then I hope they're ready for the lawsuit I'll file when this hits county review. The man hesitated, then nodded to his crew. Back it up. Leave the cones. I watched as they reloaded the tools, slowly, like they were waiting for someone else to arrive and countermand the order. No one came, not yet. But it was only a matter of time before Thora realized her silent strike had failed. I went inside and pulled the easement maps from the binder. I had the absence of permits. I had the unmerged plat. And now I had attempted enforcement on record, an action that exposed the HOA to liability. I just needed one final piece. Proof that their charter didn't apply to Parcel 1, not just legally, but practically, that the HOA had treated this land as theirs without formal absorption or acknowledgement. And the only way to get that? Force their hand. I printed a notice, formal letterhead, parcel citation, all caps at the top, cease and desist, structural trespass warning. I listed the violations: unlawful authorization of contractors, permitless trenching threats, misapplication of emergency powers, failure to notify legal owner of removal order. Then I took it to the clubhouse and posted it, centered, straight to the bulletin board, with a second copy taped to the HOA office door. By noon, half the neighborhood had seen it. By 1, the message boards lit up. Some asked if I was bluffing. Others asked how long I'd been preparing this. One neighbor from Parcel 3C posted a message that caught my attention. They threatened to pull my garden boxes last fall, said they weren't on approved soil. So, it wasn't just me. And Thora had built her system on silence, which meant it was time to take that away from her. I opened my laptop and started sketching out a terrain overlay, Parcel 1 at the center, with concentric shading to show where HOA construction had intruded onto easements. The data was public. The maps were accurate. I layered on every structure, fiber line, and pad Thora had ever ordered built. And then I circled each one that had no recorded permit, 6 red rings, each a silent boundary breach. I knew what I had to do. I called the County Risk Assessment Office, gave my parcel ID, and filed for injunctive review under structural conflict of jurisdiction. When they asked for documentation, I provided the work index, easement overlays, and photographs from the morning's incursion. The man on the other end cleared his throat. You understand, if this is confirmed, they'll lose permitting authority over the corridor. That's the point, I said. They never had it. I hung up and looked out the window again. The cone still sat at the base of the ridge. Orange, temporary, desperate. A last attempt to claim what wasn't theirs. But that fence wasn't going anywhere. And neither was I. Elias found me on the south end of the ridge, crouched by the lowest stretch of fence where the soil curved gently into the back slope. I didn't hear him at first. The wind was high that morning, and the stones carried sound in strange ways, like the ridge was listening. I read the agenda, he said. She fast-tracked it, just like you said. I looked up. He wasn't wearing his usual tie, no clipboard. Just a hooded jacket and the same creased expression I'd seen the day we first spoke in the HOA office. She wants to pour concrete by Friday, I said. He nodded. They'll use the Phase 1 Visual Compliance Clause to justify it. Call it infrastructure harmonization. But there's no legal standing, I reminded him. No parcel absorption, no recorded vote from the originating plat. And now we have the work orders. I know, he said quietly. He handed me a flash drive. I copied the contractor communication logs, he said. The internal ones. The emails from Thora's alias account. The ones she used when bypassing board discussion. I took it without speaking. My fingers curled around it like it might shatter. There's a thread, he continued, between Thora and the same contractor who laid the concrete slab under the HOA's security shed. She sent him coordinates, GPS overlays, but she never filed them through official channels. It's all off the books. That's conspiracy, I said. Documented intention to violate parcel boundaries. And they know it, he replied. Or at least some of them do. But they won't speak unless someone forces the issue. Why now? Elias shifted on his heels, looking down the slope toward the clubhouse. Because she added my property to next quarter's review list, said my retaining wall doesn't match new facade continuity standards. There it was. He wasn't just a conflicted witness anymore. He was collateral. I'm sorry, I said. He shook his head. Don't be. I should have stepped in months ago. She just moves so fast. Makes you feel like resistance is too late before you even start. I stood, brushing soil from my hands. It's not too late. He looked at me. You going to the emergency session tonight? I wasn't invited. They're counting on that, but the clubhouse meeting room is public access. And if you bring documentation, I finished his thought. They can't ignore it. He gave me a look that held more weight than any words. Then he turned and started walking away, back toward his home on parcel 2A. His stride wasn't fast, but it had purpose now. He wasn't hiding anymore. I slipped the flash drive into my inside coat pocket and climbed the slope back to the house. Lena was at the kitchen table, bent over a sketch pad, drawing the garden from memory. She looked up, hopeful. Are they still coming to take the wall? Not today, I said. And not if I can help it. Her smile was small, but it was real. I sat beside her, watching as she added shading to the strawberry planters. The ridgeline behind them wasn't exact, but the shape was unmistakable. It looked strong, permanent. The flash drive felt heavy in my coat. That night, I printed every email thread Elias had copied. I clipped each one to a corresponding permit violation, overlaid with the utility maps. Then, I prepared my statement. It wasn't going to be a debate. It was going to be a reckoning. Because Thora hadn't just tried to erase my family's land. She'd mapped her empire across ground that didn't belong to her. And now, I had proof her blueprint was stolen. I spent the morning at the county courthouse. Not in a courtroom, but in the Plat Archive office, where a county clerk named J.L. Dorian pulled the original 1982 track surveys for Gravemont Vale from a microfilm reader like she'd been waiting years for someone to ask. These aren't the usual ones people request, she said, squinting at the curl of acetate between her fingers. Developments like that usually go digital. Except when they skip steps, I said, or fabricate ones. She threaded the film and projected the original subdivision map onto the whiteboard behind her. Parcel 1 lit up in sharp contrast, clear, rectangular, and detached. At the bottom was my grandfather's signature, along with the phrase, exclusion from phased overlay, retained ownership. There was no county stamp merging it with any development. I took a photo. That's the first nail. JL raised an eyebrow. What's the second? I placed the flash drive on the desk. Emails, from the HOA president, approving infrastructure construction. Over this parcel without recorded consent. She leaned back. You're going to court? Not yet. Tonight is the emergency board meeting. If they vote to authorize new slab work, they'll be sealing their liability. You want a copy certified? 3. While she processed the paperwork, I called the telecom compliance office. After 2 transfers and 15 minutes of waiting, I reached a supervisor named Corwin. I gave him the same parcel ID I'd handed the county, along with the overlay map showing the unauthorized structure atop the conduit trench. This looks like an access rights breach, Corwin said. Your family signed the original conduit deal? 30 years ago, still active. Then you're entitled to restrict usage or charge servitude fees. If the HOA built anything permanent on top of it without legal agreement, they did. Would you like to request a service hold? Yes. It was risky. A service hold on the network corridor wouldn't just impact the HOA's cameras and internal systems. It would likely cut access to the boardroom Wi-Fi, the clubhouse terminals, and Thora's remote control server for the HOA gate entrance. But it was the only way to make them understand this wasn't about opinion. It was about jurisdiction. By 4:15 p.m., I had the certified plat printouts, the flash drive files printed and labeled, and a formal request to the county's Code Review Commission, time-stamped and filed for pre-litigation standing. All that was left now was to deliver the fuse to the room already full of gas. The HOA boardroom was unusually full that evening, not just the 5 board members, but neighbors, contractors, and 2 local reporters from the Valley Ledger. They were here for the drama, the fallout, the spectacle Thora had promised them. She was seated at the center of the panel, gavel near her hand, smiling like this was a formality. Let's begin, she said. I waited until the second item on the agenda. Emergency Infrastructure Harmonization, Phase 1, Parcel Reclamation. That was my cue. I stood from the back and walked toward the front with the red binder in my hands. Point of order, I said. Parcel 1 was never legally absorbed into Gravemont Vale HOA jurisdiction. This vote is void. Thora's eyes narrowed. Mr. Soltran, you are not recognized. But the county is, I said, placing the certified plats on the table. This is the original tract map. Your overlay was never signed by the owner, my mother. That makes your planned construction unlawful. I turned to the room. And these, I continued, laying out the emails, are internal communications between Thora Bellamy and contracted demolition teams, authorizing removal of private property without permit or notification. The silence was immediate. Only the hum of the overhead projector remained, flickering just slightly as if the room itself held its breath. The lights went out. Half the boardroom monitors blinked dark. The projector stopped. Thora's laptop closed itself with an audible whine as her remote system shut down. The telecom hold had kicked in, and with it, every signal, physical and digital, shifted to my side of the line. The outage spread faster than I expected. By the time the board realized their tablets weren't reconnecting, the clubhouse gate system had stalled in an open position, and the security feed monitors along the back wall went dead. One of the junior board members, Marcello Bain, stood up and started pressing buttons on the wall control panel like sheer repetition might fix it. It's a connectivity issue, he muttered to no one. It's just a network hiccup. I said nothing. Across the room, I watched as Thora closed her laptop and slid it aside with practiced calm, but her fingers twitched as she reached for her phone. She tapped something, stared, then tapped again. Harder. No signal. The entire HOA network hub had gone dark, because it didn't belong to them. I'd like the record to show, I said evenly, that Parcel 1's private easement, used without permission by the HOA to support their digital infrastructure, has now been restricted in accordance with county and telecom regulations. Elias sat still beside the board dais. His hands were folded in front of him, one thumb running circles over the other. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. His earlier silence had already spoken volumes. Thora stood slowly. We'll reconvene once the systems are restored. You don't have the authority to suspend this session, I replied. According to your own charter, emergency votes require quorum and open minutes. You initiated the vote. We finish it. Someone in the back muttered agreement. 2 seats over, Board Secretary Leah Dorn flipped through her printed agenda packet and paused. "He's right," she said. "If we break now without formal closure, the vote is considered passed by default." Thora froze. She hadn't planned for interruption, only dominance. She'd expected to steamroll the room, sign her approvals, and celebrate victory over dinner. But now her entire system, both technical and procedural, was unresponsive, and the ground she'd built her claim on had just been exposed as someone else's. Mine. I stepped forward and placed the final document on the table. "This is a formal notice of structural injunction, issued by the County Code Review Office. Any attempt to proceed with construction or demolition on Parcel 1 will now fall under immediate legal scrutiny, and if your vote continues, every board member in support will be listed by name in the litigation." Someone gasped. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. A breathless sound from a neighbor seated near the coffee urn, like she'd just realized the rules could break both ways. Thora's voice was sharp. "You've manipulated the process." "No," I said. "You tried to manipulate the map." I pulled the county plat into view again. "This tract predates your board, predates Gravemont itself. You can't annex it with a spreadsheet." Behind me, the back door opened. 2 city planning aides stepped into the room, badges visible on their lanyards. The taller one gave a small wave. "Mr. Soltran," she said, "we received your filings this morning. We're here to observe and validate for the pending standing claim." That was the last thread. The room shifted. Leah looked at Thora, then stood. "I move to table this vote indefinitely." Marcello followed. "Seconded." Elias cleared his throat. "All in favor?" 3 hands rose, then 4, then half the room, homeowners and observers alike, stood, raising their hands in quiet, unanimous support. Even those who didn't understand everything understood one thing now. Thora didn't own the land she stood on. She didn't own the corridor beneath her gate controls, didn't own the signal flow powering her cameras, didn't own the fence, the stone, the line, the signature. She had built her power on assumption, and assumption had just been evicted. As the vote closed, Thora lowered herself into her chair without a word. Her gavel sat untouched. I gathered my documents and nodded once to Elias. His gaze met mine just briefly, and he gave the smallest nod in return. Outside, the gate still hung open, silent, powerless, waiting. And I walked through it not as a member of her board, but as the owner of everything she thought she controlled. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was nervous, because I couldn't turn it off. The silence after the vote wasn't peace. It was strategy recalculating. I'd spent years helping developers secure access rights, arguing over inches of soil and metadata tags buried in 100-page plats. But never had I stood on this side of the line, with my own home in the crosshairs. Now I was done defending. It was time to move. By morning, the Gravemont Vale community site was flooded with questions. Screenshots of the vote tally circulated alongside grainy cell phone pictures of the city inspectors sitting in the back row. Someone had posted a photo of Thora leaving the meeting, hunched forward, hand pressed to her temple. The caption read, "Queen Bellamy dethroned." I didn't comment, didn't like or repost. I just read, watched, waited. At 8:34 a.m., a new notification hit the county portal. HOA permit freeze, pending jurisdictional review. It was official. Every plan modification project tied to the HOA, gutters, sidewalks, shed height adjustments, and yes, the slab reinforcement over my land, was now halted. I forwarded the link to Elias. 10 minutes later, my doorbell rang. It wasn't Thora, it was Tom Barrick, Parcel 5A. A retired systems engineer who'd spent the last year locked in a petty feud over the color of his garage door. "I saw the maps," he said, skipping any pretense of introduction. "Yours, and the ones she gave the paint inspector last month. They don't match." "They never did," I replied. "I kept copies from the enforcement letter she sent me. Want them?" I nodded. "Bring everything." By noon, I had half a dozen neighbors emailing me copies of their violation notices, everyone referencing the same fabricated overlay Thora had used against me. All of them bore a watermark that said GVPA's 1 Composite, which didn't exist in the county registry. I pulled them together, matched each to the real parcel boundaries, and sent the compilation to the county code office. Less than an hour later, I received a reply. Thank you for your cooperation. This overlay appears to be an internal document not filed with any municipal or planning office. Will be noted in standing review. Thora hadn't just overstepped. She'd manufactured an entire false boundary map, and she'd used it to rewrite reality. At 3:05 p.m., she emailed the HOA community list for the first time in weeks. Subject: clarification regarding recent events. The message was 4 paragraphs long and full of words like miscommunication, development era anomalies, and temporary setbacks. She never mentioned my name, never acknowledged the vote, but she did announce that, due to procedural conflicts, she would be stepping down as president, effective immediately. Elias took over as acting chair. I knew he didn't want it, but at least now, the Ridge had a defender, not a conqueror. That evening, I walked the full edge of Parcel 1, traced the path of the basalt fence with my fingertips. I paused where the ridge narrowed, where the fiber markers still poked from the gravel. I tied a red ribbon around one, just to remind myself that even invisible lines could become visible again. Behind me, Lena's laughter echoed from the garden. She was barefoot, moving slowly but steadily across the soft soil. She leaned over the planter boxes to inspect the strawberry sprouts. When she looked up, her eyes caught mine, and she beamed. "The flowers are blooming," she said. I nodded. "So are the roots. Not every war ends with banners. Some just end with truth. And the truth was, my family never gave away this land. Not with a signature. Not with silence. Not with time. It had waited, quietly, stubbornly, for someone to remember where the line had always been. Now it was remembered, and the ground beneath Gravemont Vale would never feel the same again. The emergency community meeting was packed wall to wall. More people than I'd ever seen show up to a Gravemont gathering. Folding chairs lined the walls, people stood in the doorway and leaned against the back windows. The HOA board sat at the front, minus one chair. Thora's seat was conspicuously empty. In its place sat a printed sign, vacant, pending special election. Elias tapped the microphone once. "This session is now open. Per our charter, any homeowner may speak." He looked out over the room. Not at me, at everyone. But they were already looking at me. I stepped forward, not to take the podium, but to stand next to the utility map I'd printed in wide format and pinned across the front corkboard. The lines glowed in red and blue under the overhead light. Every easement, every fiber route, every parcel boundary that Thora had tried to erase. I didn't raise my voice. "My name is Merrick Soltran. My family has owned Parcel 1 since before Gravemont was platted. This ridge, this land, was never signed into the HOA. Every attempt to regulate it, fine it, or build on it has been a violation." The silence in the room didn't break. It deepened. I turned to the map. These orange lines represent the buried utility corridor, installed in 1992. It feeds power and telecom to the HOA's outpost, gate controls, and surveillance systems. All of that sits on my easement. A hand went up in the third row. Greta Wild. "So, the HOA's security systems rely on your land." "They always have," I said, and Thora knew. Or if she didn't, she acted as if she did. She used an unrecorded map to justify enforcement. She sent contractors to my property with orders to demolish a boundary she never owned, and she filed permit requests that bypassed the county. A murmur swept through the chairs, not panic, recognition. Tom Barrick stood next. "That overlay she sent to the paint inspector, mine had no parcel stamp." "She used a version labeled GVP Hayes 1 Composite," I confirmed. "That document does not exist in the county records. It was created in-house, used to target non-compliant properties without legal backing." Elias cleared his throat. "We've submitted that version to municipal review. It's now part of the inquiry file." The man 2 seats down, Marcello, shifted uncomfortably. "Was this only about your land, Merrick?" "No," I said. "But it started here. And this fence, this one that stood for 50 years, was her test case. If she'd succeeded in removing it, she'd have poured a new slab, one that would have made her fabricated boundary permanent." A woman in the back raised her voice. "She cited me for flower boxes, said they weren't HOA-approved materials." Another added, We got a violation for a dog gate, said it interrupted fence continuity. One after another, the stories poured out. Small violations, arbitrary fines, quiet threats disguised as policy notices. And all of them, every single one, traced back to that false overlay. It wasn't just about me anymore. Thora had used Gravemont's rules to build a kingdom of fear, not with enforcement, but with confusion. She made people question what they owned, and that was over now. Elias rose from his seat. I propose we move to a vote, motion to formally vacate the composite overlay and reaffirm original parcel. Add boundaries per county filing. Seconded, said Leah Dorn without hesitation. All in favor? A sea of hands lifted. I didn't raise mine. I wasn't part of the board. I was something else now, something older than their rules, but finally acknowledged. The vote passed, unanimously. Elias looked at me, then to the room. Motion carried, effective immediately. Enforcement actions based on the invalid map are null. All outstanding violations under it are rescinded. This includes Parcel 1 and the structure known as the Soltron Ridge Fence. Applause didn't erupt. It rolled, like thunder from distant hills, relieved, rooted. I stepped back from the map, took one last look at the easements I'd fought to prove existed, and then walked out into the night. The stars above the ridge were sharp and unshaken, just like the stones below. The gate clicked open for the first time in 2 weeks. No stutter, no grinding delay. The new signal came from a clean node, the one rerouted around the corridor that cut through my property. The city had installed the junction box just off the western easement, outside the reach of the HOA's control hub. They didn't ask Thora's permission. They asked mine. I watched the technician finish calibrating the unit, then wave up at Lena from where she sat on the ridge, legs tucked under her and sketchbook on her lap. She waved back, her cast long gone now, her walk steadier with each day. The strawberries had bloomed white-tipped. One had already begun to redden, a small miracle. The kind that doesn't show up on plats or charters, but still grows between stones. Behind me, the new HOA board had just finished their final round of parcel audits. Elias had formally stepped down as interim president that morning after the last compliance reversal was mailed. Over 100 violation notices were revoked. 2 structures marked for demolition were preserved under legacy protections, and the new vote, approved by over 80% of homeowners, had passed to bar any future map overlays without full community ratification. Gravemont Vale wasn't a kingdom anymore. It was what it should have been from the start. A neighborhood. Elias approached slowly, paper in hand. You'll want to keep this, he said. Final disposition of complaint. Parcel 1 officially declared outside HOA jurisdiction by a county review. No further actions permitted. He passed it to me like it might still be warm. You did more than save your fence, he said. You gave the rest of us a boundary to believe in. I nodded, not because I needed the praise, but because I finally understood what that ridge meant. It wasn't about law or land or legacy. It was about remembering where the line used to be, and standing on it until the world remembered too. That night, Lena and I sat on the stone wall under the porch light, a blanket around our shoulders and her sketchbook between us. She'd drawn the garden again. This time with shadows. Not threatening ones, just real, honest. The way shadows fall when the light is strong enough to meet them head on. Do you think she'll come back? She asked. I didn't have to ask who she meant. No, I said. And if she does, it won't matter. This place doesn't belong to her anymore. She smiled and leaned against me. A quiet beat passed between us. Then she looked up. Are you ever going to tell them what happened? I thought about it. About the neighbors who still didn't know how close they'd come to losing more than fences. About the people in other neighborhoods, other HOAs who wouldn't even know their rights were dissolving until it was too late. Yeah, I said finally, I will. Because that's the thing about land. It keeps the truth under its skin. You just have to know where to dig. If you've ever dealt with an HOA that tried to rewrite your property lines, erase your voice, or tear down something sacred to you, know this. You're not powerless. You just haven't been shown the map yet. Subscribe if you're watching from a neighborhood like mine. The next story might be yours.